So Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, just signed into law the controversial Don't Say Gay bill. So this bill bans lessons and teaching. You've heard of the bill. You know what the bill, Don't Say Gay. No, it's more like we don't really want to be teaching our kids this at a really young, impressionable age, where maybe a second grader probably shouldn't be exposed to this kind of content. Let's be reasonable. The birds and the bees is one thing. Getting into sexual orientation and all that other stuff, that is simply not reasonable. And I think that's what the Don't Say Gay bill basically outlines. Let's check it out. Before we do, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies. I read the news for reasonable people. Is it reasonable? Is it reasonable that kids as young as kindergarten are getting taught about sexual orientation and, just stuff that in 2022, we're just, yeah, it's okay. It's acceptable. I mean, why wouldn't we? Well, because it doesn't make any sense. Kids can't process it at that age. Plus, half of this stuff should be taught at home. Shouldn't be the schools teaching it. Hard no-go. That's my thought anyway. And a lot of these things I haven't spent a ton of time on because my kids are older. I don't have to worry about it on an individual basis. But as far as maybe being a grandparent down the road, oh yeah, you're learning what in school? Oh yeah. Let's think about some of those things. Let's come up and let's reimagine and rethink what they're teaching you at school. I mean, are we going to have those kind of conversations? Probably. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who I do like. I really do like. Is he going to be our next president? Is he going to be our next option? I think so. I think you got Ted Cruz. I think you got Ron DeSantis. I think Donald Trump will talk about running. He's got a massive war chest. Trump does. That one political committee, the PAC that he's got going, like $127 million, just enormous amounts of money that he's raised. One thing about Trump, he is amazing at business and raising money. I mean, that guy gets her done, right? So we got Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. I think Trump, getting back to that real quick, I think Trump will talk about running. I think he'll maybe start a campaign. I think he dips out. I think he backs DeSantis. That's just kind of my thought. That's my initial thought. The bill bans classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. This is one of those things where my kids are going to be, one's going to be 29 in a couple of days and the other turned 26 in December. So I'm 20 years past this for the most part. There wasn't any mention of, hey, in your child's class today, we spent 3 hours talking about sexual orientation and gender identity. No, that wasn't a thing back in the day. I mean, you're just trying to get your kid. Is he reading? Can he write? Can he do the basics? Does he get in fights with other kids at school? Is he doing his homework? Questions about sexual orientation or gender identity, those just weren't even on the list of things to check in on when my kids were little. But apparently this is a battle that we're working through now. And I find it's simply not reasonable. This makes no sense. What are we doing? Well, this is apparently what we're doing. So, and instruction on these topics cannot occur. That's what the bill says in Florida. In a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards, according to legislation, House Bill 1557. Boom. Right? So we will make sure that parents can send their kids to school to get an education, not an indoctrination. That seems pretty reasonable to me. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah. Want to learn about, the physical aspects of the birds and the bees. When should that come in? I don't know, 5th grade, 6th grade. I'm being told that because of the hormones and the foods, our kids develop way earlier. The girls should develop way earlier. And so you got to talk about this stuff earlier than you used to have to. It's like, okay, there's just so many crazy things going on in the world today. Oh, don't do that. This triggers you. Just got through recording a podcast on the Declaration of Independence, having a trigger warning on it now because it's a little out of date. The fact that it was written in 1787, it might be offensive and it might have material in it that triggers you if, you're said to be triggered. Whole word. We should outlaw the word triggered. Literally, just take it out. It's just not a reasonable word. It used to be when it meant something, but now that everything triggers everybody to some aspect, only the people that are really triggered, because there isn't much that triggers me. There really isn't much. There's things that are upsetting, but triggering me into a reaction? No. Hell no. That's ridiculous. I don't, even if you say something offensive to me, I'm not going to be like, oh, geez, that should have a trigger warning. Good Lord, that should have a trigger warning. No, that's just called being weak. The legislation states that the Florida Department of Education would have to update its standards in accordance with the requirements. We just go down so many roads here, right? Under this bill, parents can also decline any mental, emotional, and physical health services available to their children at school, and schools will be required to notify parents of their child's use of school health services unless there is reason to believe that disclosure would subject the student to abuse, abandonment, or neglect. All right. So much technical stuff now. All right. So here are signs being held up at some kind of rally, probably denouncing this. God loves all children, not just the straight white ones. All right. It's okay to say gay. All right. Governor DeSantis, love, not hate, say gay. This isn't what we're talking about, saying or not saying gay. This is talking about educating kindergartners up to third grade. Let's run through that for just a split second for those of us who don't have kids that are there anymore. Kindergarten, call it 5 or 6 years old? We used to have a thing where you just go right into kindergarten. There wasn't really daycare. I never spent time in daycare. My parents just, they figured it out. And my mom stayed at home. I guess I'm really dating myself. My mom stayed at home. She never had an outside of the home job. My wife didn't either. And in the 1990s, that was a weird thing because housing was starting to get expensive and, not everybody made enough money to get by. But that was one thing that I always thought, hey, if my dad could do it, I can figure out a way to do it. And yeah, you're poor when you start out because in your 20s, you haven't had enough time to amass wealth, but then you figure it out and you start getting going and, you do what you can. And yeah, you're poor, but so what? Life is a struggle. Get used to it. Move on. That's just kind of how it goes. So kindergarten, 5 or 6, preschool, 7. Then we go 7, 8, 9, maybe up to 10 for third grade. These are young kids. You're talking about some young kids here. Why are we introducing them to these topics that are beyond where they should be? That's the way I believe. I just don't think you should have these conversations and be teaching these kids at this age. And that's what this bill says. It doesn't say, don't talk about gay people. It doesn't say that. It just says, don't teach kids at a really young, impressionable age when they may or may not be able to handle this topic and all the stuff that goes with it. Don't teach them that then. That's what it says. I'm okay with that. The bill is expected to go into effect July 1st. I think the last couple of years have really revealed to parents that they are being ignored increasingly across our country when it comes to their kids' education. We have seen curriculum embedded for very, very young children. Classroom materials about sexuality and woke gender ideology. We've seen libraries that have clearly inappropriate pornographic materials for very young kids, DeSantis claimed at the signing. You've all seen videos of the mom rolling up and reading some porn to the school board, and it's porn out of books that are at school. And people are like, oh, geez, that is not right. That's not good. Well, neither is your kids reading this. Your kids get to a certain age, they're going to be looking at porn on the internet. Let's just admit it. Let's just admit it right now. No matter what kind of filtering systems you have in your computer, your phone, your iPad, your whatever, your kids are going to get access to some crazy, crazy stuff that in my age, I mean, literally, when I was young, I'm 53 now. The only thing you had were some pornographic magazines and some pornographic videos that you could only get at an 18 and older video store. You know, like that section in the back of, you know, I'd say it's that section in the back of the local video store before Blockbuster became and then wasn't a thing. Where you've got the adult section. It's like, oh, that's 18. Oh, that's where you get the good stuff. And then the magazines were behind the counter at like 7-Eleven or behind the grocery. Yeah, just, you know, porn. You didn't get it by dialing up on your phone or your computer or your iPad. And now kids have access to all that stuff. So they're going to figure it out. But do we need to be teaching that right off the bat, well before they're, what are we talking about? Talking about, you know, all this other stuff. What are we talking about? The bill has stirred debate and controversy nationwide. Critics say that this ban is aimed at ridding classrooms of LGBTQ content and discussion. I don't think it is. I think it's just saying, hey, there's a hard line in the sand here when this is appropriate and when it's not appropriate. And I think a lot of the LGBTQ and the list goes on. That should be dealt with at home. I think those things should be dealt with at home, not necessarily at school. I mean, you're not talking about religion at school, are we? No, dealing with that at home. This is one of those things where, but we've gone so far the other way that we literally, it's a governor of a state where he's drawing a hard line in the sand too and saying, all right, here it is. Under third grade, hard no go. This is what we're doing. So they say it will harm, critics say this will harm LGBTQ youth by shunning representation and inclusion in classrooms, putting the mental health and safety of this group at risk. I don't think that is the case. I think we are waiting for an age-appropriate time, and this governor has said when that is, and that's what this bill states. I think that's reasonable. If you don't like it, then maybe you shouldn't live in Florida. That's kind of my thought. It's like, here's what we're doing. Okay. There's a lot of crap that I don't like in Washington, and I have the right to just move my ass out and go somewhere else. I choose not to. I choose to talk about the crazy crap that Washington is doing because I get paid for how much crazy crap is going on in Washington. And stories, I've got podcast stories for days. The stuff that I don't read, I could just fill up volumes. All right, here's another crazy story. Is it crazy enough where our listening and viewing audience is going to actually turn their heads? Because there's so much nonsense going on in the state of Washington, in the state of Oregon, that those could be just literally channel after channel after channel of the insanity that we continue to watch and see. And it's like, all right, this is unfolding in real time during my 50s. When I was a kid, if this stuff was even brought up, somebody would have just dropped the hammer on it. And I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just saying, 20, 25 years ago, this kind of stuff would have been a hard no-go. Let us be clear. Should its vague language be interpreted in any way that causes harm to a single child, teacher, or family, we will lead legal action against the state of Florida to challenge this bigoted legislation. Local LGBTQ advocacy group. I get offended by having to read all those initials. I do. I get triggered. We should have a trigger warning on that because that's too hard to say and there's too many, and trying to figure all that out, I need a trigger warning. Advocacy group Equality Florida said in a statement. They also said erasing the presence of the LGBTQ community from lessons implies students should be ashamed or should suppress their gender identity or sexual orientation. No, those are not causal things. Those are not causal things at all. We're just saying have those conversations at a time when it makes sense and it's appropriate because they're on the verge of dealing with that with their own sexuality. That is basically what we're saying here. That's reasonable. And I think that is reasonable. I don't think you're going to have a lot of folks say, that's not reasonable. You're going to have a lot, very, very, very tiny minority is going to say, that's not what we're doing here. Legislators against the bill argued that students are aware of gender identity and sexual orientation at a young age and said schools should be allowed to offer spaces to discuss these topics. offering spaces to discuss the topics and having it being part of curriculum, those are two different things, I think. And if you're a parent, you've got so many crazy, this is the thing with people with either old like me, where your kids are young, you get to a certain point, old like me, and you don't have kids that are young is what I meant to say. You get to a certain point where, you're working on your kids and you're literally trying to make them not be mass murderers. That's at the top priority of your list. My child is not going to be a mass murderer. All right. So they get to like 12 and you're like, okay, haven't killed anybody so far. We're doing good. They've only got, minor infractions with the law to worry about. We got some of that, usage of stuff that may or may not be, deemed to be appropriate. Yet all the other kids are doing it. So we got to work through that. You're just trying to get your kids to be decent human beings and roll out of your door, not, bringing immense shame to your family. I think that's what we do a lot of times as parents that are probably more well-adjusted than myself as a single dad, probably had lots of other discussions about, stuff that made their kids better people. As a single dad trying to run a couple of businesses and trying to hustle, making things happen, didn't have a lot of topics of those discussions, but we did talk about stuff. Sex was we talked about sex. I mean, I'm a single dad. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about girls, but we're not going to talk about stuff that they're not able to handle. And that's where the line is being drawn. So I think it's crazy that, this is what we're dealing with here. One of the things that I talked about with my boys is, I don't know if it went anywhere, but if you're talking about, some hot chick, got to remind them, hey, that's somebody's daughter. And not that really goes anywhere, but I think that is the angle. Well, when you're having that conversation, especially when you're a single dad and you're talking to your two boys, hey, that's somebody's daughter you're talking about. Okay. Yeah. You got to put that out there, because otherwise it's like, okay, society just, has that whole angle of sex thing, and that's all you deal with. And you kind of forget as a parent, all right, just deal with the basics. That's somebody's daughter. Okay. And then go appropriately with that. So laws around the country, including in Florida, have targeted and sought to bully some of our most vulnerable students and families and create division in our schools. I don't think we're trying to bully anybody. I think we're just trying to say, and we're trying to have a conversation, that maybe kids don't need this kind of information floating through their skulls at this important part in time. Now, a lot of people want to say, well, they know by the time they're 5 if they're going to, transition. And then I see all the stats on how unhappy the young kids are that have transitioned. And that kind of pops into my head. And, suicides and drug use are, much higher in kids who have these challenges, who aren't quite sure which direction they're going to go. And you have these topics and, you teach these kids at a super young age. Does that have anything to do with them coming up in their heads? Well, maybe I'm not a boy. Maybe I'm not a girl. I don't know, but it certainly can't help. There's enough for kids to be trying to work their way through versus being taught in school and kindergarten. All right, here's what you're learning today, little Johnny or little Susie. I think we've gone too far, and this bill is trying to round things back out, bring it back a little bit more reasonable. He added, my message to you is that this administration won't stand for bullying or discrimination of any kind, and we will use our authorities to protect, support, and provide opportunities for LGBTQI students and all students. I think that's fair. I don't think the DeSantis administration is trying to do that. I honestly don't. I think they've just said, yeah, not at this age. Not at this age. And you know what? Give them a few more years. Let them germinate as human beings a little bit longer. Figure out what's up. Because kindergarten, you tell a kindergartner, about some of this stuff, you'd be like, what? What are we even talking about? They shouldn't even be talking about that stuff at that point in time. I don't think. That's my opinion. And I'm a parent of 2 fairly well-adjusted kids. So there, I got my kids that far. Hurrah for me. You know what I mean? I think all parents do that. Okay, my kid isn't a child molester as a young adult. We're doing good. You can't have really super high standards. You got to have standards that are obtainable. And so there you get, you do that and then you pat yourself on the back. Okay, they've made it through life as a young adult into their mid to late 20s and they haven't really screwed anything up all that terribly. That's as good as you can hope for. People are going to lie and they're going to say, I want my child to be the greatest example of a human being of all kinds. All right, that's great. All right, but set your sights to realistic levels. That was my whole MO. Overpromise, underpromise, overdeliver. I think that's where you need to go with that. So what we're preventing is a school district deciding they're going to create a curriculum to insert themselves. Representative Joe Harding, the sponsor of the bill, told ABC News in the podcast Start Here. He added, families are families. Let the families be families. I agree. The school district doesn't need to insert themselves at that point when children are still learning how to read and do basic math. So true. Do you remember learning how to read? What if you were thrown in a book about daddy and daddy or mommy and mommy? What if you were, threw that in there? You're just trying to get the absolute basics of like letters and capitals and where you put them and, pronunciation and how you say stuff. And, oh, that kid sounds funny when he talks. Literally, that's what you got going on. And so read and do basic math because kids are just brutal, aren't they? They're just brutal to each other. Some of the things that I see, and it doesn't get that much better as they get older. I remember going to drop something off to my kid at a fraternity, and it was during rush. And, that week where they decide which fraternities and which sororities they're going to be in. And there was this girl walking down the sidewalk and she had not had a good rush experience, whatever it was. And she was all dressed up. She'd obviously just come from an event and she was just bawling. So, kids are brutal. Kids are brutal. Stuff happens and, the sky falls down on you at times. But when you're trying to figure out how to read and do basic math, maybe then isn't the time where you introduce these other topics that have a slightly more adult-like, thing to them. The bill is not intended to hurt students, added Florida State Senator Kelly Stargell in debate in the legislation. This bill is not intended to out gay children. This bill is intended to strengthen the family. So, bill is not intended to out gay children. This bill is intended to strengthen the family. That's kind of the way I see it. That seems to me to be reasonable. I don't see any reason kids as early as kindergarten need to be dealing with this stuff when they're trying to figure out their ABCs and maybe do a little tiny basic math, because we all know those are skills that are going to go with you for the rest of life. This other stuff, you're throwing it at kids at too early an age. That's the way I see it. That's my opinion. You might have a different opinion. You might say, hey, Sean, you're not reasonable at all. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Go watch another podcast. Not of mine, somebody else's. So, and that's just kind of what we're doing here, right? Okay. Thanks for being with me. Don't say gay. It's not about not saying gay. It's about teaching it at an age that's inappropriate. It's unreasonable. That's it for me. We'll catch up soon. Talk then. Bye for now.